This is the Brewer to Brewer podcast from All About Beer, a conversation that goes beyond the brew house and into topics that matter to brewing professionals and curious beer drinkers. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media to support journalism in the beer space. Check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer for more details. I'm Tomme Arthur of the Lost Abbey, back at you with this episode, bonus episode to be clear, conversation with my friend Steve Dressler, formerly the head brewer of Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. We'll get into that in just a minute, but first, this message.
First Tee is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. They've been working with brewers on a wide range of ingredients and delicious beers. First Tee combines the flexibility of order sizes with the experience you need to create innovative and successful tea beers. They get you the most direct from farm tea selection, so you are working with flavorful and consistent products. You can find more about First Tee's collaborations with brewers and tea ingredients by visiting blog.firsttee.com. That's blog.firstea.com.
Steve, it's unbelievable to see your face, and I miss you.
I haven't been between COVID and knee surgery that went bad. I haven't been out and about much. So
yeah, I cannot believe that we get to finally do this. So this is going to be exciting. Yeah, hopefully I don't blow this. That's my concern. So I'm going to start with the easy question, and this is two pieces. First of all, who is Steve Dressler? And I only say it in that way because as I was doing some of the research, there wasn't much about you prior to your retirement that had kind of been published. So you kind of lived in the background. It looks like
I did.
Yeah. So let's talk about your early days and just kind of how you became to be a 34-year employee of this amazing brewery.
I walked in the door on January the 9th of 1983, desperately in need of a job. And I had been doing some part-time work. Actually, I had a couple years of full employment at a fabrication company out at the airport, and I had my degrees in biology and chemistry. Sierra Nevada was looking for somebody to step in and do some part-time work on the case packing line. So they realized that I had the capability of picking up 4 bottles of beer and putting it in a box. And that was my claim to fame.
Those are mad skills. Yeah, mad skills that I think most of us possess.
I had skills. And, because of my science background, I started taking over a lot of the duties in the lab and fermentation, and got my break into the brew house in April. Because we were going to go to 6 days a week of brewing. At that time, we were doing 1 brew a day, and it was either 5 or 7 barrel batches, depending on the grist size. And we were going to go to a Saturday, and Ken wanted to know if I would take the Saturday shift, and I said certainly. Also, at that point in time, I think I got my pay raised from $4 an hour under the table to something like $5. With taxes. So I think that kind of sounds like a flat deal at this point, but I got in there. My personality, as far as being a little bit under the radar, it very much matched Sierra Nevada. We weren't in the press much a lot back in the 80s and 90s. Even in the 2000s, we never touted our sustainability work as much as we should have, in my opinion. And some of the really innovative things in brewing that we were doing, we just kind of went along and did our thing. And my personality pretty much matched that. I think Ken was very much the same way, not wanting to get into the limelight. And until I got ready to retire in 2017, at the end of 16, then all of a sudden people were giving me calls and wanting to do interviews and find out what the hell had been going on all this time. And it was kind of fun.
It's crazy. It's really crazy when I Googled it, and I couldn't believe how little information there was prior to most of those articles, and all those articles focused on the retiring Steve, not what Steve had accomplished. So.
Yeah, I was the first one to do a wet hop beer back in the early 90s. That pretty much flew totally under the radar. For the longest while. We created, I got to create a beer style, the suggestion of a good friend, but by the same token, that was pretty radical brewing when we did it. And we did a lot of things in a formulation sense and R&D sense, and that never really came up. That's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, what the hell? I just made beer for a living. What the fuck?
So, in listening to the early day conversation, what do you suppose Ken's ideal head brewer kind of would have looked like when he wrote the business plan versus kind of the role you stepped into?
It wasn't me. I don't know, Tommy. It's really interesting. When I started, there were 4 full-time employees, and then the rest of the people worked part-time, and most of them worked at this organic farming cooperative north of town in Los Molinos and grew great organic vegetables and marijuana. And so when we started to get a little bit more structured, for lack of a better term, there was one gentleman, Bob August, who had some mechanical skills that I did not have, and so he took over the packaging operations, filtration and packaging. With my science background, I took over the brew house and fermentation, and I was also doing the lab for quite a while at that time. And then the other gentleman that was there, Steve Harrison, a legend in his own right, who never got any credit for what he did for the craft industry, was our sales and marketing and transportation person. And so we divvied the pie up that way because it basically fit our skill set and personalities the best, and then we just went with it. I had no formal fermentation training or brewing education. I did get some early on at UC Davis. They were great help. Dr. Lewis was a great mentor of mine, and I did some work at the Siebel Institute to add to my education, but most of it was self-taught and just hands-on. We just got at it and got dirty. So
it sounds like in that universe that you probably had more Ken time than the other people relative to Ken's passion for beer and making and
at that time I did, and then we started in 88, 89. Then he really got involved with putting in the 100-barrel brew house over on 20th Street. Prior to that, we were in a used transmission shop that was incredibly funky. A lot of people don't even know that facility existed. There's a few photos out there.
Can you still smell the gear oil?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, we had to pour our own slope floors and put in floor drains out there.
Okay.
So when he was doing the expansion to 20th Street, that took away most of his time, and I was pretty much out there soloing. And then when I commissioned that brew house, the 100-barrel used Hoopman in 89, those were really exciting days. And he and I basically were running that brewery by ourselves. I would be brewing and cellaring the whole day, 14, 15 hours a day. And he was across the street assembling a used packaging line that he had purchased and putting it together so that we could move it across the road and reassemble it in the new brewery. Exciting times.
It's crazy to
think.
Ass
off, but the best.
In 10 years' time, he went from being on a 5 to 7 to going right to a 100-barrel brew house at a time when
we did some 15s and 17s in between. We used to. We increased our fermenter sizes, and we actually got some decent sized unit tanks. But I think my step up was from a 15-barrel to a 100-barrel.
So in that universe, what was the batch sort of? How many batches did you guys have to work on to really flavor match that?
I gave myself 4.
4. Did you need all 4?
Yes. I think I drank the first 3.
All right.
I was trying to get, the beers were so simple, and the beers that we carried over from the original portfolio, unfortunately, we don't do the porter and the stout anymore because people in this country, for whatever reason, don't like dark beer. But pale ale, I mean, it's about as simple a beer as you can get. It's pale malt and about 6% C60, and that's it.
And
Celebration, yeah, and then the hops, and so we didn't have a lot of instrumentation, and so the first thing I attacked was to make draft beer, and so that was basically getting the color match, and BU analytics and whatnot, and alcohol. I used UC Davis for some of that. BU's was basically me drinking it, I mean, and we would sit, Ken and I and the other people, everybody knew the product very well, and so we would do panels and buy the stuff off. We would say, okay, this one's good to go.
So I have a question in here that's down the list, but I'm going to ask it now. So pale ale obviously is a very iconic beer. I assume you still love it. Do you have any idea how many pints or gallons you might have consumed in your days, given that you had to do all the work for true to brand stuff over all those years?
I don't want to know. You figure I was there for 34 and a half years, so not quite 35. And I probably consumed pale ale in some form or another every day of my career.
Is it safe to say that you're the apex pale ale drinker in the entire world? Do you think anyone's had more pale ale than you?
I hope not, for their for their health's sake. For the longest time, I was the entire sensory and quality release panel, and so I would go in the morning. I would get a call, and it's like, well, we need to load batch so and so, packaging so and so on the truck, and you come out and release it. And so I'd get out of my office or wherever, brewing or whatever, they'd bring me the beer, and then I'd pour it off and look at it and taste it and then sign off on it. Incredibly stupid way to do things, but that's the way we did stuff at the time. Because did I make mistakes? Hell yeah, yeah. And then after a while, when we put in the 200 barrel brew house, I would go out in the morning and collect all the samples that I knew were going to be released for shipment the next day. And at the end of my day, I would just sit by myself in the office and sip my way through the 6-pack, So yeah, every day. And then we got into structured sensory, and we had pale ale, of course, every day, probably 3, 4, or 5 different packaging blends. And then for the longest while, of course, you had to have a pale ale at lunch. So yeah, there's been a few, and yes, I still do. I still really do enjoy it, And now that I'm not obligated, not that that's such a terrible thing, but once I retired and started traveling and doing stuff, I so enjoyed experiencing other people's work. And so I like buying other beers, and I actually went probably a week or two without a pale ale, and I had one with a burrito the other night. My God, that's a good beer,
Doesn't take much to fall back in love.
No, it doesn't. And I'm sitting here in my office, and I'm looking at 5 bottles of bourbon, some vodka, and a 6-pack of pale ale across the way there. So yeah,
I'm just going to show you that I'm drinking mine as we speak. So yes. I actually went out and purchased some pale ale last night because my fridge was empty. But
it's still, it's still, I don't know. I think it's still the most consistent, best made beer in the country.
Well, it's about time for pale ale to come back around in terms of the pendulum swing. So
yeah, I remember you and I having a conversation years ago. I think we were judging together or something, and they had just come out with a category session IPA, and your comment was like, "Fuck that! Just have a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale,"
It doesn't need to be sessionable.
No, and then so yeah, it's such a damn good beer. And it was the other thing that made it so iconic and ahead of its time was the bottle conditioning. And nobody. Well, there was. New Albion was trying to do that, but Jack McAuliffe was ahead of his time. He had the right idea, but there was nothing to support him. But Ken's idea of doing bottle conditioning and having the yeast in the package was twofold. One, it's very traditional, old world bottle conditioning beer, forget your carbonation. And number 2, he had a really piece of shit filler. And so his DOs he knew were through the roof, even though he couldn't analyze for them. But it was a good oxygen mop up.
And to this day, it's one of those topics that's not off the table, right? Not
No, I was, when I retired, I was doing some consulting and some quality auditing with some breweries. And one of the things that I was really trying to do, and it's unfortunate that a lot of breweries just aren't set up to do a back pitch of live yeast post filtration, because in my sensory and my vertical research over the years, 5 pounds of yeast solids, from the brink and 200 barrel bright beer tank, it'll give you an extra 4 to 6 weeks of shelf life. I mean, it really delays that initial onset of that oxidation. And there was one brewery that I worked with that we were able to figure out how they could do that. Could do a small back pitch into their bright beer tank. And when I revisited with them after a while, they felt that the aging mechanism was delayed by well over a month to 6 weeks through their sensory work.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and I had a beer at the time, a crystal wheat beer that was a very, very bright beer. And instead of doing a 5 pound pitch, I cut it down to 2.5 to 3 because I didn't want the visual impact on the beer when you'd pour it. And everybody bitched at me. It's like, how the hell can that do any amount of difference? And I said, well, if I'll prove it to you. We'll go through the science of it. And I did blind triangles for 120 days with a 3 pound pitch and no pitch. And at the end of the 120-day trial, statistically, the beer with the pitch always aged better, 2.5 to 3 pounds of yeast.
It's incredible. It's such a small amount.
We read this early on. The Japanese were doing some research with it, and when we came out with our draft beer, because when I started, it was bottled only. It was only bottle conditioned product, and so then we wanted to do draft beer in about 85, 86, and so we bunged the tank and let the carbonation build naturally in the tank, and then we would rack it off. The beer aged terribly. I mean, it was absolutely horrible because our equipment was primitive and transfers were primitive, and so we did some research, and Japanese breweries were doing these minimal back pitches in their draft beer, so that didn't have a visual impact, but the shelf stability was incredible. So. Any time I'd have a chance to talk with brewers, I'm totally into making the best beer for everybody. And if we can figure out a way to manipulate the system and get them a better shelf life, I'm all for it. And when I was working at the brewery, we made no bones about it. Every package of Sierra Nevada that comes out of there has some live yeast in it. And most people don't know it. It's not on the label, but that's the reality of it. And that's one of the reasons the beer stays so well on the shelf.
Absolutely. We built our brewery to do a lot of bottle condition work, and we took our lumps pretty early, and then we got really good at it, or much, much better at it. But the speciality of the tanks that we have here allow us to do things like that. So it's really exciting to hear from our perspective that there's still some work that we could do. It'd be very easy for us to back pitch and do things like that.
Oh, it's so minimal, and if you have an agitation way to do it, which you probably do, or pump in a loop. And we never, back when we started doing it, we never did cell counts. We had milk buckets and we had dairy milk buckets, and we would fill them from the brink and weigh them. And it's like, okay, that's about 30 pounds, and off we go, and it worked. It wasn't such a critical thing. When we got into the 800 barrel tanks later on, the cylindriconicals, then we would always validate cell count before going to the filler. But it's definitely, if you can do it, it's the best thing possible.
Impressive. So Sierra Nevada has always been a really hop forward company, and I just kind of wanted to start with the old days. Like, what was it like to be a hop forward company at a time when many, many small breweries weren't necessarily hop focused, and the breeders and growers weren't really looking at that as being a real business?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think when Ken started the brewery, and he was doing some studies at Davis with Dr. Lewis, and Michael was very complimentary of what he was doing, but he basically looked at him and said, "Do you expect people to drink this shit?" You know,
the Budweiser drinker that Michael is.
Yes, you know, you got goobery stuff in the bottom of the bottle, you know, and it's hoppy and bitter, and what is that aroma, you know? And it was pretty fun, you know, when I always had access to free beer, and so that was one of the main conversion points for me coming to parties, was that everybody could get as much beer as they want, and it didn't cost anything. You know, otherwise you were restricted to drinking domestic, or if you were stepping out, we would go get some nice light struck Heineken or something. But it was a lot of fun. You know, it felt very much cutting edge. You know, and when we're doing a beer like Celebration Ale, you know, which I remember reading an article back then was referred to as a Renaissance IPA. I always really liked that term.
It was very Italian.
Yeah, yeah, and it was a lot of fun seeing people's reactions to it. You know, the thing with the working with the hop industry back then was really pretty unique, because there weren't a lot of things to choose. You know, the hop industry was dominated by Germanic style, you know, noble hops grown in the U.S. You know, when I started brewing, the biggest acreage hop in the country was Tettnang, grown by for Anheuser-Busch, and the big user of Cascade in the very early 80s was Miller. And because they were using it in undetectable amounts in their beers, but they really liked it. And that's what really spurred me to start hop contracting, forward contracting in about 85, was because, you know, here again, working at the time only with Hop Union, when we went up for selection that year, Miller was going to walk away from Cascade. They were going to switch to something totally different. They like to do that at the time every 3 to 4 years and help the grower rip out all the rhizomes and
keep it interesting, right?
Yeah,
keep the consumer's interest. Yes.
And so Cascade was basically going to go away for all intents and purposes, because nobody else was really using it. None of the major brewers were interested.
Anchor was using it in Liberty a little bit.
A little bit, but not much. You know, when none of us had any volume, and so we started contracting just to make sure we would have the rhizomes in the ground. And that was a great piece of advice, you know. So the other thing that was interesting, Tomme, back then was there was almost a wall of secrecy. I don't know how to put it, between the brewer and the grower. You know, you didn't really get to meet the growers back then. You know, you would go into the hop dealer, and you would get your selection samples. You know, you'd get your brewer's cuts. The grower's name never appeared anywhere within the record keeping. It was just all a number. The grower had a number, and then there was a lot number involved. And you know, as we got more involved, we always would try and get out to a grower to see an operation. And we went out to Roy Farms very, very early on, and would visit them, and some other, and Hop Union had a farm back then. We would go to visit them, and a few others. But that was one of the nicest things, you know, over the last, at least good 10 years, 15 years of my career, was the hop growers realizing the importance that they had within the craft industry, and stepping out, you know, and walking the floor at the CBC, and being at the trade booths and chatting with people. You know, back in the 80s and the 90s, they were invisible. And I think they came to realize, rightfully so, the impact that they were having on the industry, the brewing industry, as craft beer had such an impact in the brewing industry. And then, you know, the privatized breeding programs. I mean, my God, when I'm doing some reading now, the number of hops that I have never experienced is truly incredible over the last 5 years. I have no idea what the hell's going on with some of that stuff. So
it's pretty damn wild.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I don't know, when I was first buying and contracting, I mean, I was picking up 4 or 5 varieties. I mean, that was about it. We were doing Cascade and Centennial, and I played with
Nugget.
I played with Columbus when it first came out. Started putting that in Bigfoot early on, and then we would always look for. I bought Cluster, and I bought Pearly. There weren't and Nugget. Yeah, that was kind of it.
Yeah, not a big bullion user back in the day.
What's that?
Not a big bullion user.
Ken used bullion prior to my coming on, and then also I know he did it in his home brewing.
Yeah.
And Galena was a good one.
Galena's still around. Yeah,
it's still around. Super Galena, yeah.
So I wrote this in my notes to talk to you, and we chatted briefly. But can you imagine what Cascade would look like today if it wasn't Sierra Nevada for Sierra Nevada Pale Ale? I mean, would that hop have ever made it? And you're saying no.
I don't know. 50-50, when, because Anchor, they were doing good work, obviously back then. But they weren't hop forward. The breweries that were coming up in the Pacific Northwest, they were getting into their hops, in the 80s, Hales Ales and
Camper,
and those guys, but they never gained, the volume traction that Sierra Nevada did.
Sure.
It would have been an awful shame, and as my career progressed, and I would do my forward contracting and look at the acreage figures and stuff, Cascade's really dropping out. It's not dropping out of sight, but it used to be the biggest aroma player by far, in acreage planted. And I haven't seen anything for a while, but I'm sure it's got to be down. Is it still in the top 10? Do you know?
Putting me on the spot. I'm guessing it's probably 8 or 9 if I had.
Yeah, I was going to say, Tomme, I bet it's and at the low end of that. Centennial's kind of dropping, down there with some of these other hops, and they have great aroma. The fruity flavors and aromas, but I don't know. Sometimes I find some of those aromas a little cloying.
Yeah.
They get a little bit too much for me, particularly when you get the combo of those with the hazy factor. That's just a personal comment from me. Everybody has their opinions. I know I've got mine.
We'll leave the opinions and assholes thing to we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
So is it possible that Sierra Nevada Pale Ale wouldn't exist if Cascades didn't come along, or was there a backup hop, or was there?
There was no backup hop. The other aroma hop that I was buying, the only other aroma hop that I bought back then was Willamette. And that was a big player. Abbey basically had gone from Tettnang to Willamette, which basically doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And so there was just really nothing there that was impactful. Nothing would have come out of Europe. The English hop industry back then was still good and viable, but they didn't really, nothing was coming through that was going to give Ken what he wanted, on the twist of a traditional American ale.
For sure.
So yeah, the little bit of serendipity there that they crossed paths around the same time.
So we chat briefly about the sort of the prominence of Cascade. Who grows the best Cascades?
Who?
Yeah.
I have my opinions.
All right.
No, there are some incredible Cascade growers out there, and But beauty's in the eye. I remember at one point, after the hop quality group had gotten together, and they wanted to put on this competition. And so they wanted to, it was the Cascade Cup. They would
Still
get
exists today, yeah. Yep.
This was back not too many years before I retired. And so we had a meeting at the brewery for some whatever reason. Anyway, a bunch of the brewers were there. And then the idea was growers would send in cuts, and then the brewers would rub them and rate them, 1 to 3, and then there'd be a winner, and then the winner would get the Cascade Cup. Well, every brewer is looking for different aroma attributes in the hops that they want. And so, we would go working around the room, and I'm kind of, I'm not part of the group, so I'm playing around and minding my own business, but I did rank through the hops. And then I looked at them, and some of the people in the room were picking out hops as their choice one. I wouldn't even have taken them off the table. They were disgusting, and it was a real eye opener for me. And I was at a growers once, which was really fun too, because then you get into the aspect of early, middle, and late harvest hops and how much the hops change. And we were buying Centennial direct from this grower. Excellent grower. And so we went into his room, and he said, well, we finished our selection. He's like, well, I want you to take a look at something for me. We did my group. And so he had 3 different piles of Centennial there. And it was early, middle, and late harvest Centennial. And so he said, which one would you guys pick? And so we went through the selection, and it's like, well, we want that one. And it was great because he looked at us and he's like, well, John Mallett picked that one. And that man knows his Centennials. So
they're the largest users of Centennial, right?
Yep. So stuff like that is really fun. That's one of the really fun things about hops. And the more we got into it, and then the more, we got involved directly with the hop growers, that's where it became really exciting, because then we could work with them and kind of manipulate what we wanted out of the hops that we were getting and when we wanted to get them picked. I know Matt Brindleson has a phenomenal relationship with a grower in Oregon, Gail Goshi, and she grows specifically for what his desire in Cascade or in the variety is. And I mean, they're absolutely gorgeous hops. Nobody else can get near them, but good for him. That's that thing from that one-on-one communication that you get now that didn't exist probably the first 15, 20 years of my career.
And it's an economic reality, and then it's a relationship, right? If you can afford to have that economic basis where you can be the driver and promise against it, then you can have that relationship.
Yeah, you can have that. And there is a size component in there, and you have to be willing, if necessary, to pay a premium. Sure. If I'm going to ask you to manipulate your crop for me, then I have to compensate for what might happen on a negative side for that. And I had to do that a few times, trying to get a hop that I wanted, and yields would be low. And then it's like, okay, we're going to walk on this contract, but we're going to make good, on something else. I would never walk on a contract. I tried to do an either or contract. If something came in shitty, I'd be like, well, let me take a look at this other variety, and we'll pick it up instead. I never wanted to leave a hop grower holding the bag.
It's difficult. It is Mother Nature at her best.
Yeah, I mean, they're stuck, and shit happens. It's the same with the barley crop. Things go bad in the brew house, and the first thing the brewer does is get on the phone and bitch out his maltster. and it's tough. I have a lot of respect for the people on the agronomic side, and it's nice that they're becoming more visible and more transparent.
For sure. So at some point in a bar one time, you told me that there was a hop that was numbered that you loved and it never saw the light of day. And we all know the story of CFJ 90 becoming Centennial, but can you talk about that hop that never saw the light of day and how we as brewers get back to that?
The CFJ-45. And it never, why it disappeared so quickly, I really don't know. I should have followed up a little bit more back at the time because we were really enamored with the hop. I recall us thinking that the flavor or the aroma profile was more impactful than Centennial or the -90. And we bought it the 1 year and played around with it. And there again, our portfolio was so minimal. And, beers like Pale Ale, they don't have a lot of fuck around room with them. It's like it's Cascade and then, that's it. You can't play around the fringes with a beer that simple. And so, we just kind of lost track of it. It didn't have a home, in our portfolio. And by the time we kind of pulled it together, it was gone. But it's really a shame. There was no, there were so few brewers back then that it was hard, to find anybody that had interest in it. I know that Vinny at Russian River is one of the few brewers that I've talked to that was aware of it at the time. And in my conversations with him, he doesn't know what happened with it either. I think you guys need to.
So let's talk about this. So what made it sort of cool or better or more unique than Centennial? And given that Centennial has found such a life, maybe we could get them to go back and find this thing, and we could call it the Dressler.
Yeah, that's the thing. The germplasm, has to be somewhere. Mm-hmm. I don't think they threw it out with bathwater. And it's. There's been so many changes. This would have come out of the pre-Hop Union breeding program. And because the CFJ were the initials, it was Chuck, and was it Fred, and one other guy. It was their first name initials was the breeding thing. And somewhere there's got to be a genetic background on that,
How it was crossed and how it was brought to be, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure there are some growers out there. There's some of these privatized breeding programs where they do such incredible work. If they were given the challenge and the background information, they would be up for it. The thing too, though, Tomme, I'm thinking now as I'm talking that, that was back in the mid '80s. And so if you brought that hop back now, with what's on the table, with all these new varieties that are just in your face, hop aromas, maybe it couldn't stand its own anyway. Yeah. If you're looking at Centennial, which was and in my opinion, is still such an impactful hop, it has such a beautiful rose aroma. It's having a hard time holding its own out there, within the brewing community, because it's kind of an old school, whatever.
Also not easy to grow on some levels, right?
No, it's not.
It's pretty temperamental.
It's pretty temperamental, and you get down in Oregon with it, and it's tough. But
yeah, it's the Pinot Noir.
I don't know. I fell in love with that Draniol aroma early on, and I still find it to be one of the best aromas out there. When Celebration Ale, I need to go get some because it hit the shelves about 2 weeks ago, I think, in town, and it's the most wonderfully floral, just straight up floral beer that I can find. And of course I'm blessed that I can get it, at 14 days.
Right off the filler, right?
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about Centennial is when it smells like strawberries, and I think that's just such a crazy awesome quality about it. And then you really found that home run.
Yeah, it's beautiful hop, and but I don't know, they don't. They're like Pale Ale, Tomme. That's the beer that your granddad drank. And I heard that so many times at the end of my career, yeah, my dad had that. Well, that's the beer that I drank when I was in my teens, and yeah, so, but there's some staying power there.
Awesome. All right, we're going to take a short break real quick for this message from our sponsors and then come right back for more of this conversation with my good friend, Steve Dressler. Everybody hit pause, hang tight.
First Tee is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. They've been working with brewers on a wide range of ingredients and delicious beers. First Tee combines the flexibility of order sizes with the experience you need to create innovative and successful tea beers. They get you the most direct from farm tea selection, so you are working with flavorful and consistent products. You can find more about First Tee's collaborations with brewers and tea ingredients by visiting blog.firsttee.com. That's blog.firsttee.com.
All right, we're back, and it's time to get back into this great conversation we're having. Steve, I'm curious. I've never worked for Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, but tell us what it's like to be a brewer at Sierra Nevada.
There were times when you were being worked like a rented mule. There was a lot of pride involved, obviously, because of early on when we knew what we were doing. There was a great deal of pride involved. We were a mystery to most of the people in the industry, but the growth of the brewery was so expansive that it was just work. 1996, I ran my 100-barrel brew house hot 24/7, and I was shut down for probably less than 48 hours in the calendar year.
Whoa.
But the interesting thing, Tomme, was I think probably around the 90s, when we got a little bit of size, and I started going to national master brewers conferences, and here shit, young hippie that nobody knows, and master brewers was very corporate back then, and everybody had a jacket and tie.
You couldn't find anybody to smoke weed with.
No, I couldn't. I found a lot of people to drink gin with, though. And I go in my Salvation Army sport coat. It actually did have a funeral announcement in the chest pocket when I bought it.
Oh, that's amazing.
But you would the level of respect that I was shown by people as I would walk in the room, and there was no reason there was no reason for me to get that. It was simply that Sierra Nevada, and one of the moments early on in my career, I will never forget it. I was walking through the master brewers and looking for anybody that I might know. There weren't very many people, and David Ryder called me over, gave me a little,
right?
Yeah, come on over. And he was chatting with the executive brewers from Heineken. And, they're all very buttoned down. And he introduced me to these people, and we all shook hands. And he looked at me and he said, "This man makes the very best pale ale in America." And I was having a holy fuck moment,
Yeah.
And it's I've never forgotten that, and what did I do to deserve that kind of a notoriety? And it was because of what we were doing and trying to accomplish, and as we were talking earlier, flying under the radar, it was really interesting going to craft brewers or whatever, and without not too long of a time, I was the old guy. And I had a lot of fun with that, and got to do some speaking and whatnot. But it was a very respectful position to be a brewer there. You walk into a room, or if you go out, as I really tried to encourage my staff to get out in the with sales reps and get out and sense of the industry outside of Chico. And, as soon as they found out that you were a brewer at Sierra Nevada, it was just like, oh my God, they were treated with a somewhat different level of respect. It was very nice.
One of my biggest wants and lots in life is that I kind of have a feeling that personally for me is that I want to be able to go to Belgium and I want to be able to walk into a brewery and kind of be held in that standard of this guy makes great beer like we make, but never want someone to be like, no, you're a bad imitation of what we do.
Exactly. No, I totally agree with that.
Commitment.
Yeah. So I know when we went to Belgium, when we were working on the Ovila brand family of Belgian beers, which was probably one of my favorite projects of my career, they had done, they had the Trappist breweries that we visited, they had done their homework. And we were treated with an incredible level of respect. When the head abbot of Chimay invites you back into his private quarters for an aged beer tasting, that's pretty fucking cool.
Did you get to Orval? I'm guessing on a hoppy beer level, they were happy to see you guys.
Oh yeah, I went to Orval and watched them in their cellars doing dry hopping, which really blew my mind. I would have never guessed that. And West of Letterin was great. And it was just a really nice experience. And our beer styles were so dissimilar, but they appreciated the quality of our work. So that was the whole thing.
That's I think at the end of the day, that's what any brewer wants. Right?
That's what a brewer wants.
The essence of the beer you make, right?
Yeah, that's it.
All right. So you talked briefly about Sully. You talked about Bigfoot. Let's talk about some of the other seasonal beers that you, besides Fresh Hop and things like that. Something else that you were really proud of. I've got in my notes to ask questions about Otreves because it was a sour beer. You've got the Brux project where Tenomyces came into the brewery.
Yeah.
You guys went all these years being a clean brewery, and now all of a sudden you open the doors to some really wonky stuff.
The Fresh Hop beer was probably the one I was the most proud of, because that was a logistical nightmare. Nobody had tried to ship wet hops before. And so I had some challenges and some logistical issues there. The Gosa, I hated that beer. So
both in flavor and in process.
Yeah. I think you were there, Tomme, when I got my knighthood award in Yakima, and I made a joke for the hop growers that I finally lasted long enough to get a yeast infection in my bacterial culture. And
that joke killed, by the way.
Yeah, it didn't translate well. And now I just, I didn't like the beer, and it was going to be a big up and coming brand, and it in my opinion, it had almost gone out of existence earlier in Germany for a reason. The Brux was a fun project because that was a Brian Grossman Vinny project. They really wanted to do something together, and I found it a challenge. And here again, at that point, I was really trying to expand my very narrow window of acceptability of what beers should taste like, and so I found that to be very, very intriguing. The trying to get the Brettanomyces in the package, it was
without
just
contaminating the filler, right?
Yeah. Yes. We actually bought they called it the inseminator. It would basically squirt a little amount of bacteria in each bottle as it would slowly go through the line. So we didn't include it into any of the soft goods within the beer stream, which made for some incredible inconsistency in flavor development.
It's a good idea on paper.
I remember going up to Sensory, and we would have, the beer took so long to package, and we would have 4 or 5 different packaging sets, lined up. And so we're going to taste them for flavor development, and they would all taste different, because they had different dose rates. You didn't have any way to control it. And, but that was a lot of fun. I mentioned the Ovila project. When those came out, it's still some of my favorite beers that we did. Seasonals became incredibly frustrating because they had a shelf life of about 2 years. I did the Ruthless Rye IPA. First year that it hit the shelves, not only did it win a gold medal, I think, at the GABF or World Beer Cup, but it got artwork, beer label artwork of the year in some competition. Second year, it went absolutely crazy. Third year, I'm geared up trying to contract enough rye malt ahead of time in competition with the distillers out there. And I was sitting on a buttload of rye malt because the brand just absolutely fell off the table. And fickle consumer, it's like, okay, you've been there, been there, done that, what else you got for me,
Sure.
And so now when every once in a while, Sierra Nevada will come back with it and put it in a variety pack, an IPA variety pack. And
Beautiful.
then everybody's like, God, that was the best beer you ever made,
Yeah.
Why didn't you come back out with it? And I would always be like, well, why the fuck didn't you buy more?
Exactly. That's the running thing these days.
Yeah.
How do you sort of attribute the success of Celebration and Bigfoot to so much longevity? Is it just that they're heritage seasonals, or what is it that makes them?
Bigfoot has such a cult following.
Do you believe in the Yeti?
Oh, of course.
Of course.
So did the guy he would send in pictures. He was having the entire Bigfoot label tattooed onto his back.
Oh. That is dedication.
Disgusting. There it's the Bigfoot. It's such a powerful beer and unique in its own right. The thing about Celebration Ale that I always found so complimentary is that my brewing friends, that was the beer they waited for every year to come out. That was the seasonal that it was like, okay, it's on my radar. Celebration Ale's hitting the shelves in my town next month. And then they would go out and get it. And that's the best compliment I think you can get.
For sure.
I don't know how many, I'm out of touch now with the sales figures and whatnot, but I don't know how many of the younger demographic know what the hell they're looking at. It's got a wonderfully attractive package, and they've rebranded it now for Fresh Hop IPA because
Right.
it is right after hop harvest, and so they've tried to do some rebranding on it, which I think is smart.
The log cabin with the snow was quaint, but
Yeah, and then there was the label with the people on the sled that had no eyes. I liked that one too. That was an early version.
That version needs to come back.
Yeah, it does, because the eyes are the window to the soul, and obviously there's something missing there.
So the Celebration drinkers are soulless humans?
They could be.
Is that the analogy?
Some of us are.
That's the takeaway. So you have a seasonal beer that you hated more than Autrevez, or something that you were really disappointed in having to make at any point?
No.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I'm trying to think, I don't know what my problem was with that. Part of it I know was, it was really, here again, I've always loved sensory, but the bacterial culture, the lacto culture for that beer, there were 2 totally different camps. Either people doing sensory on that culture got these beautiful floral rose petal aromas out of it, or they were like me, vomit. And it was the bottom of the garbage drain,
vomit and all kinds of
it was just disgusting. Yeah. And I didn't think it was marketed very well. There was no budget behind it. We came out with a version that it kind of flopped. It just didn't have any repeat buyer. And then they did a reformulation of it, and I said, well, how are you going to rebrand it? Because people, if they didn't like it, they're not going to buy it. And of course, then that didn't work. But it did win. The year that it came out, we entered it into, oh God, I don't know what the category was, drinkability or some bullshit category, it's for lighter beers.
Mm-hmm.
And it won a gold medal. And, I told the marketing director, he and I had some interesting conversations over the years. The other beer, I guess, Tomme, that I would have to say kind of drove me up the wall is when they wanted to put orange flavoring in pale ale and call it sidecar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
I lost it. I lost it in a product development meeting, and I was almost asked to excuse myself from the room. And I had a great conversation afterwards with our sales and marketing director, because he came down to discuss it with me, and I just basically told him, here again, my opinion, you're fucking with the most iconic beer ever made in the United States. And, from his point of view, he was trying to come out with something that would, if people liked the orange pale ale, they would go back and buy the original. He's trying to get an attention getter.
Yeah.
And it didn't last. But yeah, I told him, I said, I'm going to bust my ass making this beer for you, but I will never, ever drink one.
I can only imagine.
I wouldn't even drink it in sensory.
Yeah. But the thought from here is like, I can just see them in the annual business plan meetings and the pitches, and they're going, okay, so this is orange pale ale. It's iconic adjacent. It's like pale ale, but it's adjacent because it's got orange and it's new, and therefore it's better. And I agree with you. I never found the integration of the orange in that beer to be anywhere near what it wants to be. And it needed to be completely different base to handle that.
No, it didn't. And there was, I don't have a lot of moral positions on things, but that was one of them. I couldn't abide by that.
Didn't find the contraception fast enough, huh?
No, exactly.
Thankfully, it lived a short life.
Yes, and went away. Went to beer hell and purgatory, whatever.
Well, the work you did on it was fantastic, but it was fantastically buried the beer. So, we chatted about hops forever, but do you actually have a favorite malt?
A favorite malt?
Yeah.
Ooh, I really like roast malts. Pale malt really did some nice flavor development over the course of my career. A really nice caramel malt, a crystal malt, because of my history with it, that's got to be at the top, in the top three.
Yeah.
Because that paid the bills forever.
Sure.
Working with malt companies now and seeing the samples of stuff that they do, it's mind-boggling. I love a good chocolate malt, for playing around with some dark beers. When I started my career, you could get C60 black patent and a chocolate malt. I think Brees was doing a chocolate malt, and that was your palate.
That was your range.
That was your range, and hence the reason beers like pale ale were so simple.
Yeah.
Simple people with simple ingredients.
Was Celebration a much redder beer back in the day? My impression is that it definitely seemed redder to me.
We were really always trying to bring out that red color. And when I was doing I think it was the Ruthless Rye, we did a lot of studies on how to bring out that red color. And of course, now there are roast malts that specifically bring out that redness in the beer. But I was playing around with different roast levels and then feathering in very small amounts of chocolate malt to augment with the crystals and see if I couldn't get some of those red colors. But now there's just some absolutely beautiful malts out there, and it's an exciting time to be a brewer. felt all the toys to play with.
Yeah, there's the Irish red ale style beer, uses about 0.5% of roasted barley, and that just contributes such a real depth of red without a lot of roast texture.
No, but it's just that little bit of that tiny little bit of color. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, because I've never actually talked about what it was like being a boss, but what kind of a boss were you?
That's a good question.
Should have read the notes.
Yeah, should have read the notes. There were times I was a genuine asshole. There were times that I was expected by ownership, by myself, everybody, to get things done to a level to make things work. Running the brew house 24/7, running 2 brew houses 24/7. Denying employees, running through holidays. My management style was definitely self-taught. I never had any,
Tony Robbins guy.
Yeah, there was no training session there. So there were obviously the mistakes that go with that. And as I got older, and as my staff got older, I tried to do better at that and do better by them. And towards the end of my career, I developed a management style called "get the fuck out of the way." Because I knew that I was coming to the end of my career, and I didn't want to be the dominant person in the room all the time anymore. People needed to make their own decisions, and so don't call me. Make a decision. And that's what Ken told me one time, middle of my career, sometime in there, where I made a really bad decision, and I went up to his office and explained what had happened and what my thought processes were. And then he would always ask me that same question: well, how are we going to make sure this doesn't happen again? And I would explain myself. And then it was great advice. He said, well, next time, why don't you talk to me first, and then you don't have to share the blame just with yourself.
Oh, look at that. That's impressive.
Yeah, and so I tried, but I was in a position where I had to make so many critical decisions on the spur of the moment. There's no time. This needs to be done. It needs to be done now. And so that's what I would just say. I get paid to make the call, take my batting average. I always tried to explain my position to people that didn't agree with it. But at the end of the day, I had that was my call.
Sure.
So, and so I've lived with it.
I mean, in your world, basically, there weren't many people above you, correct?
Correct.
So
not until the last 3 or 4 years, when the brewery started to go more into a corporate mode, board of directors and things of that nature, which they needed to do. You got 2 breweries, and Ken, wants to, he needs to shuffle off stuff, and so then there was another layer of management above me. We had plant manager, and all those different things, and a different quality managing, and so I understood the necessity of it, but I didn't like it, and I was depressed about it. So that's okay. It's an evolution.
I mean, that really dovetails. One of the questions I had was, you were there 34 years. How did you know it was time to go? And it seems to.
That was one of the indicators. And I told that to Ken in my discussions, and he didn't disagree. I said, when I lost my seat at the table, the real decision-making table, that had a huge impact on me. And so I could start seeing the writing on the wall, and I wanted to. It's like I didn't want to work till I was 70. No,
I mean, it's crazy. When I told you I was doing some of the background research, we've been drinking together for a long time, but some of the real details, here's a guy that basically, had a biology science degree, starts chucking bottles and, 34 years later, you're at the top of the decision tree. That's pretty unheard of in this country. Not many people are going to have this pathway.
That doesn't exist much anymore, and it was the right place at the right time, I suppose I had the right skill set somehow, somewhere.
So is it patience? Is it bullheaded? Is it, what's the skill set for 34 years in one spot?
I would say it's a combination of both of those, particularly when I'd been there long enough to have enough self-confidence that I felt good about speaking my mind, and I appreciated a lot of the philosophical nuances of Sierra Nevada, the sustainability of it, and the quality-driven aspects of it. Those jive with my ethos really well. Early on, Tomme, you can imagine it was just a hell of a lot of fun.
Oh, for sure. I've read the book, and I know there's stuff that's not in the book. Stuff had to make the cutting room floor, but sometimes you gotta let them lie, right?
That's fine. We had a good time. It was the 80s. What do you want?
I think we've all been there. I built this brewery in the late 90s, so we know the jam.
No.
I guess one last kind of sort of mode for me is now that you stepped out of being at Sierra Nevada and you're part of this consulting world. And you and I had talked briefly about, how you rub more hops than probably anybody on the planet. What are you seeing, on a quality level and just in general, where this business has gone? It's gone to a different place for sure.
Oh yeah. It's the quality level is incredible, small brewers of any size now, if I go to visit, you go to the craft brewers conference and you walk the trade floor, you can buy good quality equipment on any brewing and packaging level. And you have a nice bottling line. I mean, we had a short filled soda filler, and so you can get a nice bottling line and good brewing equipment. Raw materials are so more readily available. The education of the brewers, the ability to educate yourself. Al Gore hadn't invented the internet when I started my career, and so you had to go find a book, for Christ's sake, and so the education of the brewers that I talked to, it's amazing. The quality of the beers is truly astounding. When I was doing some work pre-COVID, one of the things that I would like is for a sales rep to take me around to local breweries and meet the brewers and then just taste, their beers. Outstanding, really, really good. But you still run into people, drives me nuts. Can I see your lab? Well, we haven't put one in yet. And then you go on a little bit of a tour and they've walked with their gumboots through the unswept malt room with dust all over the floor and then back into the brewery, and place is shitty dirty and, you don't want to smell in the corners. And, and they just don't get it. I don't understand that. And their beers pretty much reflect that. If they're usually not really good. Other that they might be infected. But in the early days, you go up into the Pacific Northwest, and it was very hit or miss to find a good clean beer, without bacteria in it. And now, God, it's a pleasure. I love going out and about and tasting. So
I've been marveling. I've been sitting at our bar the last couple of weeks, and for whatever reason, our filtration/centrifuge program is kicking out some of the brightest beers that I've ever seen. But they're super foam positive, and they just radiate in the glass, and they're glorious. And I'm like, yeah, that's great looking beer, visually stunning. doesn't look like that opaque, oat bomb down the street kind of thing.
No, and it's, I love that, when you look at your work at the end of the day, and it's just like, God, I'm impressed.
Especially when it leaves a ring every 2 ounces.
Oh, isn't that? Yeah. That's good stuff.
That's where it's at. Well, I think they want us to wrap up because we could do this for hours and hours on end, and we'll probably have to come back and get into like year 2, so that we, can handle this. But really want to thank you. I really
Tomme.
Enjoy the conversations. And just a quick reminder before we go to visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media at allaboutbeer. And to support beer journalism in the space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. I am the Tomme Arthur of the Lost Abbey. Really want to thank Steve Dressler, formerly of Sierra Nevada for 34 years, and John Hall for giving us the opportunity to create this Brewer to Brewer podcast. Cheers, everybody. See you out there.
Cheers. Thank you.
This episode was brought to you by First Tea. First Tea delivers the ingredients and experience brewers need for delicious beers and innovative flavors, flexible order sizes, and direct from farm teas for your next brew. Find out more about First Tea by visiting blog.firsttea.com. That's blog.firsttea.com.